Hello everyone, welcome to the HEC Paris Executive Education virtual conference room for our first webinar. When joining the conference room, you will notice that your microphones have been switched off. However, you will be able to ask questions and to make comments by using the chat box. The moderators will relay your questions and your comments to our professor. We will begin this webinar in 10 minutes. Hello everyone, welcome to the HEC Paris Executive Education virtual conference room for our first webinar. When joining the conference room, you will notice that your microphones have been switched to off. However, you will be able to ask questions and to make comments by using the chat box. The moderators will relay your questions and comments to our professor. The webinar will begin in 5 minutes. Thank you. Hello everyone, welcome to the HEC Paris Executive Education Conference Room for our first webinar. When joining the conference room, you will notice that your microphones have been switched off. However, you will be able to ask questions, to make comments by using the chat box. The moderators will relay your questions and comments to our professor. Stay tuned, we will begin the webinar in a couple of minutes. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to you all. I am Nicolas Lemoine, Senior Executive Director for Custom Programs. And on behalf of the board of HEC Paris, all of our faculty and all our teams, we hope you are keeping well during these unprecedented times. As an academic institution, we strongly believe that the current situation lends itself to reflection, and that the best way for us to support you is to share the analysis of HEC Paris professors. So the presentation will last about 30 minutes and will be followed by a 15 minutes Q&A, question and answer session. There are many of you today with us, but we will do our best to respond to your questions. So with us today is Jeremy Ghez, Associate Professor of Economics and International Affairs in the Education track at HEC Paris. And today, Jeremy is going to talk to us about uncertainty, which is definitely a key color in the current business, political, economical, social landscape. But first, I would like to ask Nicolas Boukater, who would like to welcome you on behalf of the Lebanese community. Nicolas?
Thank you, dear Nicolas. Good afternoon. So I am Nicolas Boukater, President of the HEC Untitled Chapter. First, I would like to welcome you all and transmit on behalf of all the Lebanese participating to this webinar and our alumni, a very warm thank you to you, Nicolas Lemoine, and to all the wonderful team at HEC Executive Education for organizing this series of webinars online pro bono to help Lebanese business leaders lead their organization in these very turbulent times. An additional proof that HEC values of solidarity is at the core of its mission. As HEC, we've brought value added to students on campus, Lebanese students on campus, to NGOs, Lebanese NGOs on the ground in Lebanon, and now it's time to bring value added to Lebanese community of entrepreneurs leading in the midst of this crisis. In Lebanon, when many of us are not seeing anymore the light at the end of the tunnel, we have together, as a business community, the responsibility to lead the change. The best place to do so is inside our organizations. These webinars are designed to help us understand how others in the world have faced similar types of crises, how they have successfully reacted, get key insights and learning from our star professors at HEC on how to manage our mindset, how to change the algorithms of our thoughts, how to adapt to new strategies, continue on inspiring our teams, and lead by example. Lebanese business leaders have permanently turned difficulties into opportunities. Hopefully this time, our combined decisions will not only help us turn around our organization, but also together help shape the new Lebanon of tomorrow, transform hopefully Lebanon into a productive economy, not only for the benefit of Lebanon, but also for the benefit of the region and the world. I'm very glad today to introduce HEC's Star Associate Professor of Economics and International Affairs, Jérémy Ghez. Jérémy, the floor is yours.
Dear Nicholas and Nicholas, thank you very much for that very kind introduction. I'm not sure it was entirely deserved, but it was entirely appreciated without a doubt. I am very happy to be with you today, very enthusiastic about the conversation that we will have together. I want to preface everything that I'm about to say by saying something that I think most of you already know, but I do not think this webinar is going to be a game changer, a life-changing event. I am very much humbled and very much aware of the situation the country is in right now. I realize and have really a good picture of the type of challenges, the humongous challenges that you face as a country, as a community. And I understand that there will be no perfect recipe in this webinar. And I certainly understand that I will, again, have no life-saving solution to give you. But I think that we need to have a conversation. I think we need to be thinking about alternatives, ways of thinking. It is so easy when you have been facing catastrophe over and over and over to believe that catastrophe will always be part of the landscape. This is not true. And in order for catastrophe not to be part of the landscape anymore, well, we may need to wire our thinking, wire our brains in a different way. A little bit like an athlete preparing for a marathon. Well, we need to do the mental gymnastics. And by we, I mean everyone in the world needs to do a little bit of mental gymnastics to get out of the tunnel vision of the pandemic, and in Lebanon in particular, of the recent catastrophes, as significant as they were. And in this whole conversation, maybe we try to think in a different way. Maybe we try to open up boulevards in a different way, again, to bring about a different future. To discuss this and to think about this, well, I thought that I would share with you a tale of two jobs. Right now, I think a lot of you guys look like this, look like the firemen, are basically trying to put out a fire, either metaphorically or even physically, are trying to repair a window or repair a door, and are trying to figure out how in the world do I save my business and make sure that my business isn't going to be bankrupt tomorrow morning. This is you, and I do not blame you in the sense that to a large extent, this is the reality of many people in a crisis mode. In order to rewire our brains, in order to think differently, then maybe we can start thinking like architects again. Firemen, they put the fire out. And the problem is that by putting fire out after fire out after fire out, sometimes this can be satisfying, but the problem with this is that we don't take the time to build. We don't take the time to rethink. We don't take the time to reinvent the architecture. And by not reinventing, we fail to basically imagine this with an open mind. And by not reinventing, there's also something that humans do is reproduce yesterday's models. And this may be a fatal mistake in Lebanon and in beyond. We need to think about how do we revisit all of these models in a different way. In other words, I will never tell you never act like a fireman, especially when there's an existential threat and you need to put the fire out. But maybe we need to rebalance our thinking and to favor a little bit more the architect in an alternative way and start pushing, again, this alternative thinking. a lot has been written on this, and I want to be reassuring to some extent. This is not just Lebanon. You might know of Arthur Brooks, a very famous American intellectual, that basically said in The Atlantic, and I recommend this article, just last week, we feel hopeless because we tend to basically only feel optimistic and in control when optimistic things are happening to us. And this is a common bias that we call the availability bias, which is basically we're likely to make judgments based on events around us, use these as examples. So this means if your daily life is about the explosion, if your daily life is about the pandemic, if your daily life is about the economic consequences of all of this, because of the availability bias, we're going to be in a setting in which this is going to become part of our daily lives and in a continuous way. So we need to break this cycle, and we need to basically start thinking about this in a different way. What I want to say very clearly to all of you is this might be, and in my conversations with some of you, and I thank you for taking the time to help me prepare for this conversation, this is basically year zero for Lebanon. And I want to say a special word, especially to the younger generations who might be here. And I'm thinking maybe a few of you who are still on campus or who are on campus studying. You're the guys who will rebuild this country ultimately. You are the guys who will basically state loud and clear, there can be no continuity. So this means in practice, the banking sector, the insurance sector, tourism, all of these things, yesterday's models are obsolete, and we know that. And those who will strive are those who will basically be able to recognize this as early as possible and to basically start thinking the assets of my country, be it the sun, be it water, be it energy, how in the world do we rethink and re-embed this? But here's the challenge, is that more often than not, the answer to all of those questions, and I am probably guilty of this, is I don't know. And this is the problem with uncertainty, is systematically, we accept this notion of saying, I don't know, especially that the present may be so overwhelming that we think we've already lost the fight, and we already say, I don't know. Well, in order to rephrase this fight, in order to reformulate it, maybe we can't think like firemen again. We need to think like architects, and we need to be fighting a very long war. Fighting a long war, meaning this is a 20-year transformation, a 20-year economic war where we'll have to transform the country. This is not going to happen overnight. And you need to take a decision on this, and you need to think about this. Because ultimately, what does I don't know actually mean? It can mean very, very different things. And by not recognizing that it may mean very different things, we might end up in a stalemate. So what does I don't know actually even mean anyway? Does it mean I don't know all the facts because I didn't do my homework? Or because it's hard for me to burst my bubble? Or because I just don't know basically who's telling the truth or who's not telling the truth? Does it mean I don't know? Does it mean that there are so many open questions that at the end of the day, I don't know the answers to those questions? Or third possibility, does it just mean that we are completely in uncharted waters? And as a result of that, I just don't even know what the question is. I don't even know how to ask those questions. And trying to think about what we mean by saying, I don't know, I'd like to show you guys, this has business implications. If I don't know means this, I don't know all the facts, then we're gonna have to think about this from the standpoint of being analytical. And we'll see how hard it is to be analytical in this world. If the I don't know statement is more related to the fact that, there are a lot of open questions, then maybe we're going to have to think about this from the standpoint of how do I increase my organization's adaptability? This too we'll talk about. And if I don't know means I just don't even know where we're going, I don't even know what the right question is, then maybe this is about increasing resilience, about increasing imagination, and this too we'll tackle. In order to summarize all of this, I always go back to the same sentence, and those of you that I've met know this. I'll let you guess. Let's see how many people actually guess who said this. But there are no knowns. There are things that we know. That's for the facts. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know that there are some things we do not know. That's for the open questions. But there are also unknown unknowns, the ones we don't know that we don't know. And more often than not, this is basically the strategic surprises that creates the most havoc in our daily lives, but it doesn't mean that it has to be the case all the time, and we'll have to talk about this too. So another way, there are known knowns. We have to work on our analytical skills to make sure that certainties are indeed certainties. Known unknowns, open questions. So we must adapt. We must, like a cat, always be able to fall on our four legs. That's for the risk part. And our unknown unknowns, that means uncertainty. That means questions we can't even formulate. So therefore we must develop resilience as a result. On the certainty part, what's the problem with known knowns? I wouldn't have never even talked about this 3 or 4 years ago. But with this development of fake news and this whole conversation about fake news, more often than not, the conversation is about saying, you know, am I sure this is the truth? Obviously, the COVID crisis has basically accelerated this in the sense of asking, is this really the truth? And this tribal way of thinking, what does tribal mean? It means I belong to a tribe. Nicholas belongs to another tribe. Maybe we belong to the same tribe, and in that case, we can talk, and we've talked, and we probably belong to the same tribe, or at least tribes with lots of similarities. We can talk, we talk the same language, and by the same language, I don't mean English, I don't mean French. I mean a language where we both understand not only the words, but what they mean connected together. But if we don't belong to the same tribes, likelihood is we will most likely never meet. And if we do meet, well, ladies and gentlemen, it's going to get ugly and ugly fast. Research has shown that, you know, I have a Facebook page. You most likely have a Facebook page too. Research has shown that what I'm likely to see on my Facebook page are things that are only going to confirm what I already think. And what you see on your Facebook page is going to confirm what you already think. So instead of the internet, instead of the social media bringing us closer together, it's actually driving us further and further apart. And in this context, it's getting increasingly difficult to be analytical because it requires us to burst this bubble, to burst this idea of us versus them, and to go beyond the tribe, and to go try to figure out what is happening actually beyond it. This is the psychological effort. Well, this is how technology is making this even more difficult. So some of you might have heard of deepfake. Deepfake is, well, take this video of Barack Obama that has completely been doctored from beginning to end. We know his image, we know what he looks like, we know his lips, we know basically his voice, and we've been able to reproduce a wide range of sounds from his voice and to doctor this video. In other words, take Photoshop. I can doctor a video on Photoshop. Well, deepfake is basically the exact same thing except for video. And you basically start to think about how difficult it's going to be analytical in this world, given the psychological issues that we talked about, but given this new technology. 2 or 3 years ago, I told my students, but rest assured, it's okay, because you need so much for so many people in terms of voices, in terms of images and so on, that it's going to be hard to doctor. It's still possible, but it's going to be hard to doctor. This is what I said 2 or 3 years ago. And then, ladies and gentlemen, this happened last year. Same technology, except that it dramatically improved. It dramatically improved. You don't need the videos. You don't need the data. You don't need all of the samples of voice. You just need a still picture of Mona Lisa to get her babbling and babbling and babbling, or a still picture of Salvador Dali to get him babbling and babbling and babbling. So again, why is it so hard to be analytical? Obviously, there's a tribal effect, and this isn't going to get any easier for this generation, who's going to have to deal with a technology that is going to challenge our very understanding of what truth is, because so many things can be doctored. This means a lot of critical thinking, a lot of doubt, and a lot of efforts to really remain analytical and to basically try to think about what is true and what is not. Last but not least, political and trust politicians all over the world to make your life difficult. There might be politicians in the room, so I apologize for saying that, but trust politicians to make your life very difficult. I could have chosen a gazillion examples. I decided to choose one area that I know and that I am interested in as an American. the whole TikTok idea of how this basically challenged the a way we think about mergers and acquisitions, the way we think about doing business, because political interference is so big. And what makes business sense today might not make political sense tomorrow. And in order to be analytical, yesterday, your predecessors just needed to build a business plan, convince investors, convince bankers, convince their employees, and it was done. Now you're facing a business environment in which there's going to be a deep political interference going down the line. Number one, the true leader of tomorrow is going to have to be analytical to make sure he understands or she understands what we're talking about when it comes to certainty. Number two, this leader is also going to have to be very, very adaptable, because there are plenty of questions, plenty of known unknowns, plenty of open questions that people are going to have to deal with. In order to try to understand what this means is, okay, take this rubber band right here. You guys have all played with rubber bands. You've pulled on it and it comes back. You've pulled on it and it comes back. You've pulled on it and it comes back. This is what we mean by open questions. So who will be the next president of the United States? What will be the barrel of oil tomorrow? What will be the temperature in Beirut tomorrow? Those are open questions, and I can try to answer these. And maybe I may be wrong. There'll be tensions, but again, I pull on the elastic and I come back. Why? Well, because I'm flexible, because I'm adaptable. And there's plenty of fields in social sciences, in business, where you can extrapolate. Examples, the weather, contrary to the climate, which is interesting. The weather, I can have a very sophisticated app on my iPhone that gives me the likelihood that it will rain in the next 15 minutes where I am. Demography can estimate very scientifically and very accurately the rate at which a population is aging, for instance. So there are many things that you can extrapolate. So don't give up on known unknowns, meaning don't give up on asking questions, because our ability to continue asking those questions helps us better frame this business environment and helps us better understand, the type of things we should watch out for. I'm guessing there are parents in the room. You guys have maybe a 5-year-old like me in the household. The 5-year-old is really good at asking questions. Then as she grows older, she's going to ask less and less and less questions. That's something we humans are not good at. Kids, really good, and then we basically lose patience. This is a fatal flaw. We must continue asking questions in order to basically remain flexible and to basically continue understanding that cause and effect, trying to continue understanding the mechanisms of the world. This is incredibly, incredibly important. You guys have heard, I think, a lot of scenario analysis, trying to think about, the different scenarios your organization might actually be facing going down the line. A way to think about the usefulness of scenarios is to say, okay, I can build a map of the future using those 3 to 5 scenarios. How in the world do I basically ask myself, what I'm doing today, how relevant will it be no matter what scenario materializes tomorrow? This is the topic of my MOOC that you can freely access online, building scenarios, scenario analysis, and building flexibility. And, this is a conversation I had with some of you. Some of you belong to this generation, so maybe you can just put your hands on your ears for a second. But those younger guys and those younger gals, they know what they're coming from. What they're coming for, in a business. They have lots of values. They have lots of things on their minds. I know this, and I've known this for maybe 6 months or a year, because I need them in the classroom every single day. And what is so striking about them is that maybe paying a mortgage, like we cared about, isn't necessarily their first thing on their mind. Owning a car, not necessarily the first thing on their mind. Unfortunately, in my opinion, building a family might not be the most enthusiastic thing they want to do given the context, and to some extent, I understand them. Meaning what? When they come to your business and when they go to the business, they're going to be looking for values. And think about what's happening in the United States. Black Lives Matter. All of the positions taken by those businesses on that question, or on question of Me Too, on our real political, social questions in the United States. Why is this? Because it's an HR problem. It's a problem in terms of how do we continue recruiting. So if you really want to be adaptable, pay attention to what's happening here, because you're going to need those talents going down the line. And I think that those talents will basically maybe be the lack of continuity compared to the past, and maybe the scenario that you must bear in mind going down the line. So be adaptable and make sure that you understand that yesterday equals today equals tomorrow might be very satisfactory to the brain, but it never works, especially not as a scenario for human behavior. So the leader of tomorrow, analytical, flexible, but here's the problem. Flexibility isn't infinite, so that leader is going to have to show a lot of imagination going down the line. Back to my rubber band. I'm sure you guys thought about this when I was talking about it. You pull, it comes back, you pull, it comes back, until what? Until you pull too hard, until the tensions that we spoke about are too big, and your rubber band breaks, and it hurts. In that case, what do we need? Flexibility, again, never infinite, never going to be something that you can always rely on. It means that from time to time, your world can crumble, and do you have what it takes to still survive and fight another day? Do you have what it takes to imagine a whole new model? And this too is most likely going to be critical when to think about it. Because in this case, when dealing with uncertainty, there's no more cause and effect. Or let me rephrase, there is cause and effect, but that is so complex, so difficult to process, that to a large extent, we're basically dealing with something that is fundamentally hard to process for the human brain, given its complexity. How do we think about this? Well, you can think about this from the pre-mortem. Some of you that I've met certainly know the pre-mortem experiences. Pre-mortem experiences basically saying, take a perfectly well-living body, big company. Imagine that 10 years from now, it goes bankrupt. As the participants in the room, maybe this is your own company for that matter, so ask yourself, how did we go bankrupt? And participants basically develop a really long list of ideas. And then I say, okay, back to the present, back to 2020, how do we basically reinvent? And how do we basically make sure that we avoid going down that path? This is not scenario analysis anymore, because you take your audience, you take your workers, you take your employees, you take your audience in a very extreme place. So it's not scenario analysis anymore, but it's basically asking, do you have what it takes to basically reinvent? And if not, what type of avenues do you need to explore when it comes to basically thinking about resources, human resources, in terms of imagination, in terms of benchmarking, looking at what people might have been doing and what you're not paying attention to. This is what I would call the resilience part, not lacking imagination enough to reimagine a world in which your own business environment has basically crumbled and you can't believe in anything anymore. What does this mean? Well, okay, leader of tomorrow, analytical, flexible, resilient. And if you take those three, in my opinion, you got right here a definition of creativity. Because creativity can't happen in a vacuum, or it can, but then it's not really business or pragmatic business way. You need basically to think about this from the standpoint of saying it has to be analytical. It has to take into account those questions that I keep on asking and that have a real value. But you can't exclude imagination from this, and you can't exclude reinvention, otherwise it wouldn't be named creativity. Anthropology teaches us a lot from this standpoint. Now, you might remember Lamarck. Lamarck was the ancestor, so to speak, to Darwin, often mocked for his hypothesis. But now we're starting to think maybe he wasn't as wrong as we thought he was. Lamarck, remember, the giraffe, he said, had a very small neck. But as trees grew and grew and grew, the giraffe needed to stretch and stretch and stretch to go grab the fruit. And as a result of that, the giraffe, as we know it today, has a very long neck. Mocked, but now we're starting to think the experience of your predecessors, of your ancestors, does affect your genome, does affect your DNA to some extent. I'm certainly not an expert in this, but this is what the research has basically been talking about. Darwin, obviously, we know the difference. Basically saying any species is going to generate a set of variations, and nature, by coincidence, almost is going to choose what variation will actually last. If we transpose this to business, In Lamarck, the Lamarckian model is interesting. The business environment changes, namely the tree grows. So you, the giraffe, you, the business, have to adapt in order to adapt to that changing business environment. Again, business environment changes, you adapt. The corollary is the business environment doesn't change, you don't need to adapt. This model, well, works quite well when you try to describe the world of post-1945. It works quite well in understanding what is actually happening in the world of post-1945, where we basically adapt to outside shocks. This model right here works far more when we talk about the digital world. And what is interesting about this whole conversation is, you know, the inventions that are at the heart of our daily lives, I'm thinking social media in particular, were kind of a very natural selection process, almost by coincidence that were selected. And this is a very Darwinian world from that standpoint. What is the corollary of that? Well, in order to survive, you're going to need to generate a lot of ideas. Generate a lot of ideas, because by generating a lot of ideas, you will end up with a good idea. In order to come up with a good idea, put differently, you're going to have to generate a lot of ideas. And you see a lot of companies trying to do this because you need a lot of bad ideas to get to the good idea. And this is what anthropology teaches us. Last but not least, I'm sorry for the auto promotion, but I do want to come back. We talked a lot about the world, about what's going on, but this whole definition of creativity means a lot is about you. A lot is about you today, about your ability to become an architect of change, not just a fireman, but able as well to construct, to build, to rethink, to reinvent the new models that will be completely different than what we've seen in the past. And that leader, I told you, is going to have to be analytical, is going to need to adapt, and can never lack imagination. And to me, that is the true type of profiles we really need, the real architects of change. I told you this was year zero for Lebanon. To some extent, we might argue this is year zero for the world, ladies and gentlemen. 2020 is the year zero for the world today. And if you really want to make a difference, this is, I think, in my opinion, where we have to start this rewiring of our brains that I was talking about earlier, and this rethinking about our relationship to creativity. Yes, we need to put the fires out, especially when those are existential threats, but from time to time, we also need to think like an architect, all right? Generate a lot of ideas is going to require diversity. And when I think of Lebanon, it's not very hard for me to think about diversity, especially when I think about the diaspora. What is interesting is that from my conversations with some of you, I drew this lesson of saying, don't overestimate its size, because that was a common mistake that we've made in the past. The diaspora is huge, it's not that huge, but don't understate either its weight and what it can do in terms of capital, financial capital, but also in terms of experience. It's all over the place. And that diversity in the generation of ideas and the need for creativity can be a real asset. And this too, we're going to have to think about, I think, for the future of Lebanon. You will need to think about this, of how do you embed that diversity going down the line, all right? And, you know, when you think about the young, they have plenty of things to say. I've said this in the past, but, you know, this is up to you guys to basically grasp all of this. Because think about it, you know, Lebanon can go faster than anyone. Those are very traditional macroeconomic models. In the wake of a catastrophe, when a lot of capital has been destroyed, we know economies can grow very fast. The real challenge is about forgetting about yesterday's models, which doesn't mean forget about your history. It means trying to create a real rupture in terms of business practices. And that means there can be taboos about nothing, not about Lebanon, not about its context, not about its environment. And you really have to open up all the doors that are necessary for all of this. I want to state, last point, I know that this is short. I know, again, that this is not a life-changing recipe for any of you. And I think that this conversation is just starting. So I think it's important we continue it. So by all means, I hope all of you connect if we're not connected already, and we continue this conversation. Well, right now with questions and answers, but ultimately with, you know, in time going down the line. So thank you very much. And please check out, you know, the coming webinars of my brilliant colleagues that are coming in the framework of Lebanon. And here I think there are different custom programs as well. And I'll let my colleagues talk more about that if they wish. I hope I was on time.
Absolutely, Jeremy. As always, shall I say?
I try.
Right on spot. Thank you very much for that, which is to some extent seriously challenging the opinion that we can have of ourselves. Yeah, I'm seriously wondering if I am, provided that I am a leader, which is not demonstrated yet, do I have the quality that you are mentioning? That's a serious question. Probably my team would be best to answer. So, Nicolas, maybe you can start. Yeah, I mean, lucky all of you. You have two Nicolas today, so that created some misunderstanding in the preparation of this webinar, but we manage it. So, Nicolas, maybe you can start with a couple of questions on your side.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Jeremy. Very inspiring. I have two quick questions on my mind that comes up immediately. The first one, Jeremy, the businesswomen and men leaders of today in Lebanon and elsewhere usually tends by instinct to firefight, like you show, the crisis itself, while losing sight on the long-term survival of their business and the vision. Do you have any recommendation for many of us leaders today on the call on how to organize themselves, how to delegate firefighting maybe, and rather spend a lot of more time on redefining the long-term strategy and grab new opportunities and redefine the new Lebanon? This is one question. The second one would be, what type of companies are likely to strive in this business environment, and how to engage our team to create new ideas with us? Any model you suggest in that sense?
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for that. On the first question, don't get me wrong. I fully appreciate the role of firefighting. Well, first and foremost, it's an existential threat, so you must firefight. That's not up for grabs. And I also understand the psychological utility of firefighting. Namely, if you, the leader of a business, or the leader of a business unit, or the leader of just a small team, if you do not firefight, then I don't think you can expect your employees to actually firefight when you need them to act. So I have nothing against firefighters. I think that what we need to think about is maybe a rebalancing act and again, a rewiring act. And I think that, basically, how many times have you taken, how many opportunities have you taken to basically start taking your team away from their daily lives and maybe doing, for instance, a pre-mortem exercise. Again, pre-mortem exercise saying, guys, imagine we're 10 years from now, we go bankrupt, what happened? They're on the ground. They're on the ground and they see a lot of things that we do not necessarily see or that you do not necessarily see as leaders. And what is interesting is that they might actually bring your attention on those trends that are bugging them, that are creating problems for them, but that don't necessarily create a problem immediately today to solve. And similarly, when you say, okay, well, we're not going bankrupt in 10 years, but what do we do differently today? Again, the pre-mortem opens up our minds and basically leads us to explore ideas that we've never thought of in the past, that we've never explored in the past. I am always reminded in those terms of the joke. I know you're not supposed to tell jokes during a webinar, because you rarely get a result. But anyway, I'll try to laugh at my own joke or not, I don't know, of this drunk person during the night looking for his keys. I'm sure a lot of you know it. You know, he's looking for his keys under a lamppost and a police person comes and says, did you lose something? And he says, yeah, I lost my keys. And the policeman says, you lost them here? And the drunk guy says, no, I lost them over there, but the light's better over here, so let me look for it over here. This is a metaphor about us, ladies and gentlemen. We look for solutions. This is firefighting. We look for solutions where there is light. We rarely go explore the places where there is no light. And this is exactly what we need to do. The leader, in terms of, yes, delegating without a doubt, and there are plenty of colleagues who could talk about that, certainly firefight when you need it, but from time to time, try to explore those uncharted territories. Try to explore those avenues where there is no light. This is basically where you'll feel least comfortable, but it's the place where there might actually be true value in terms of thinking about possible solutions. And I think that, you know, there's another thing as well, and I know this is very cliche, but at least we start to understand things. You know, imagination doesn't come only when you're sitting down in front of a computer looking at emails. It comes from traveling. It comes with reading books. It comes with talking to people. I almost joke, but I am seriously considering next year to do a mandatory assignment with some of my students to basically take a taxi cab and maintain a conversation with the taxi driver. Because that taxi driver is most likely than not seeing a lot more people than you are, opening up his or her bubble a lot more than you are, and I think bringing insights, I think. And if you can maintain that conversation, maintain that curiosity, maintain that open mind, I think that would make a lot of sense, and I think it would help you maintain that open mind going down the line. When it comes to the second question, which is absolutely not unrelated, obviously, companies who strive, I think it's this idea of saying, you know, how do you let this team basically explore those avenues? So there are different models out there. The legendary Google 20%. Google 20% meant senior executives at Google basically had 1 day a week on average to explore whatever they wanted and did not even need to necessarily account to their supervisors about what they were doing. This is interesting because Google executives said, we generated a whole lot of ideas, a really bad set of ideas that were never workable, never feasible, but this is how Gmail came up. This is how we started to see this link that we could see between email, Google searches, and this whole integration at the Google level. So give them time to basically think about these things. Another way to think about this as well, I think, is on the diversity front. That diversity front, I mean, to be brutally honest, it is not with old people of a certain age, of a certain gender, that we're going to generate the new ideas we need. Maybe it's time that we go talk to other people. And I see this new trend, very good and very agreeable trend of hackathons. That's an interesting way of getting to speak to a wide range of stakeholders, of people who might not be seeing the world you are in. Maybe this is a trend when we talk about academic chairs. How do we get that debate organized between you, the corporate sector, and us, the academic world? How do we start thinking about the type of conversations, the type of debates? I think that those companies that are, number one, flexible, may be able to both do firefighting and architectural work. Number two, open-minded. Remember that this is about building resilience, opening up our minds. And number three, who are able to build on that diversity and able to talk a lot and generate a whole lot of ideas, thinking, you know, there will be a lot of bad ones, but it's okay because if I get one good one, then that's the one I need. I think those are the companies that are likely to be able to strive going down the line. And one last point on this, when you look at what's happening in the United States, the country I know best, and might be your reality and European reality going down the line of political interference, you see that those who strive are those who are able to dance on their 2 feet and not only have a pure business and economic cost-benefit analysis of the situation, because it's going to be wrong, because there are plenty of forces that are going to come and interfere. So adapting that whole 360-degree view of the problem is absolutely critical. I hope I'm making sense, Nicholas.
Very much. Thanks a million, Jeremy.
Thank you.
Jeremy, we've got a hell amount of questions which are all interesting. I have to say that it's really amazing. So maybe I would like to ask you 2 questions that are out of the thread. And if you could keep 2 minutes at the end, because I have a personal question to ask you at the end of the conference. So the first one that I'd like to ask you is asked by Rita. And she's asking, how can we react like an architect? What does it mean really operationally?
Let me take an example from your personal lives, because this might actually be even more impactful. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, go back to your personal lives and remember the last time you put a fire out. Between two kids, or between a kid and a spouse, or between a spouse and a father and a mother, or a father-in-law and mother-in-law. Remember the last time you put a fire out. We humans feel really good. It's addictive. It's a real addiction. Because, you know, we see ourselves as superheroes. We've saved the day yet again. And there you go. What would the world do without us? So that addiction, like any addiction, is something we love and we basically feed ourselves of. And it means what? It means that the more we do it, the more we want to do it. So operationally, and back to the business side, how do we become architects? I think, again, it's about trying to take the time away from the desk, trying to lock yourself up, maybe with the team, and try to think about what are we not paying attention to? What are the things that are going to basically explode in our faces right now, tomorrow, that we're not paying attention to today? In the intelligence community, this is what they call the early warning signals, and anything has to be on the table. Maybe this is about bringing in outside people and so on. And again, this is not something that people dealing with day in and day out issues are naturally inclined to do. And to go back to your question, Rita, and thank you for asking it, again, I go back to my metaphor of practicing for a marathon. I can tell you my body isn't naturally open to running a marathon. I need to practice. I need to basically practice and practice and practice. Well, the same way, the brain is not naturally open to acting like an architect, not naturally open to going exploring things that we're not even thinking about, not naturally inclined to go explore the boulevards where there is no light. So this is something we need to practice and practice and practice, and continue asking questions to your people who work for you, continue asking questions to the people outside who might not have that tunnel vision, and opening it up. And concretely speaking, the pre-mortem exercise. Imagine you're going to go bankrupt in 10 years and then come back to day one. Concretely speaking, the early warning signals. What are we not paying attention today? What trends are we not paying attention today that will matter to us tomorrow? Or just plainly, or not that plainly, because logistically it takes time, organize a hackathon and get students, get outside people, get people who don't usually work with you guys to basically shed light on areas that you might not pay attention to right now.
Yes, I think it makes sense. Thank you very much, Jeremy. There's a question which I found a little bit different, and that's why I'm going to ask it to you. It's a question from Antoine. Antoine is telling us, in times of crisis, usually there's a lot of emotions involved. So how do you think these emotions should or will interact with the leadership spectrum in discussion, notably in the business area?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. And, you know, as an economist, this is one of the shortfalls that we face you know, there are human emotions behind all of this. We've made progress in economics to embed this. No, I think that's a wonderful question. It's a hard one. And maybe I want to go back to my answer to Nicolas Boucater and say, well, maybe the leader who needs to be analytical, who needs to be flexible, and who needs not to lack imagination, all of this goes, I think, to some form of empathy. Something tells me, knowing Lebanese people the way I know them, they show compassion. That's not the problem. Showing empathy is something slightly different, and I'm sure they can. Probably putting yourself in other people's shoes, trying to walk around and trying to understand what world are they seeing, and what crisis are they seeing. And this goes back to the whole tribal issue, trying to move beyond tribalism, but by asking this question of saying, what world do they see? You're going to get insights on their emotions. And what might seem completely unexplainable, what might seem complete hysteria, or what might actually seem complete, quite to the opposite, coldness, in a time of crisis, the way you see it, all of this might actually show, provide you insights with what they're actually feeling. Put yourself in their shoes. This is important because we often accuse our politicians of lacking empathy. We often accuse leaders who can't show empathy, and this can be extremely problematic because when you can't show empathy, you might not be able to mobilize people. You might not be able to connect with people. And I think this is a true quality of the leader, the ability to basically connect with the people. And, you know, between you and me, maybe just for cynical reasons. Maybe that might be a sign of the cynical leader. I hope it goes beyond this, because when you mobilize, it's mobilized for the long run, as we've argued in this whole conversation. And if you really want to mobilize for the long run, I think you're going to need to go beyond cynicism. But there you go. I think this is how we start to embed emotions. And I hope I've addressed Antoine's question.
Thank you, Jeremy. You are pushing us to think differently and to reshuffle a little bit the way we do business. And there are several questions. And I'm going to take the one on that particular topic. I'm going to take the one of Manal. He's telling us that under pressure, flexibility can lead to complete conversion of the type of business. So how do we decide whether we keep our old business, the legacy business, or if it's worth it? And how do we decide if we abandon it to move to something totally different?
How much time do we have, Nicholas, to answer that question?
I mean, you have, it should be a short answer. So it's going to be difficult. And unfortunately, you will have no time to elaborate some speech on the future of cash flow and discounted cash flow analysis and that sort of thing. So you have, let's say, you have 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah. I believe in creative destruction, as any economist does. Creative destruction means there can be no taboos. And for the legacy business, there can be, from time to time, hard decisions going down the line. And this is kind of the simple answer. But I imagine that because of emotions, because of business specificities, because of business environment specificities, this answer, this simple answer, might be somewhat dissatisfactory and not so satisfactory for quite some reasons. I often tell my participants, and my apologies if there are any in the room who are going to hear me say this story again, but maybe go back to Alice in Wonderland, or the sequel to Alice in Wonderland and the Red Queen. You know, the Red Queen, I'm going to give you the short version of the story, starts running with Alice, and they run very, very fast, known as the Red Queen's race. And Alice is stunned because she says, I can't take it anymore, I can't take it anymore, stop running. And she's stunned because when they stop running, she realizes she's in the exact same position where they started. And when she inquires the Red Queen about this, the Red Queen says, yeah, well, in this country, in order to stay in position, you need to run. In order to get any place, as a result, you need to run twice as fast, and this creates problems. I think this is exactly what my last question is about. You need to run twice as fast. You need to run in order to stay in position. If you're a dominant firm, you need to run twice as fast. I think the real challenge is, as you run, and if you find justifications to preserve the legacy business, especially when it's meaningful, I guess the real challenge is, how do you embed that in your race? How do you basically include that in your race? That's for the short answer. And I'll be happy to take this and to continue the conversation and online, on the social networks or wherever else, because I think it's a really, really important question. And I think that some of my colleagues might actually tackle this as well, because I think we're deep into strategy and deep into financial principles of strategy, and this is important.
Yes, it will be, part of it will be covered certainly in our next webinars. So Jeremy, before thanking you and letting you go, I want to take the opportunity because you are an expert of what's going on in the US and you closely monitor what's going on the other side of the ocean. We've seen a debate a couple of days ago. That was a memorable debate. Was it good? Was it bad? Could you share with us your opinion on the Trump-Biden debate?
It was a very painful moment as an American, a very painful moment that illustrated all of the divisions inside a country. One journalist said it's a good image of America, a country in which everyone's talking, but no one's listening. It's a good image of what happens in a country that is extremely tribal, in a country in which if I say anything, I'm only going to convince people who are already convinced. And those who don't think what I think are basically not even going to pay attention to what I'm saying. This debate, if you can call it a debate, I'm not even sure you could call it a debate, was a perfect illustration of this. The glass half full would say, you know, America is really good at inventing poison, but it's even better at inventing the antidote to the poison. So I'm hoping that we will be inventing an antidote to the poison, and I won't elaborate on what the poison is, but please do not speculate on what I think what the poison is. We can take this conversation afterwards, not an issue. The glass half empty is this an image of business environments that become really polarized and really, really tribal? And is this the cautionary tale, the antithesis of the role of the good leader that we were talking about with Nicolas Boucater earlier, the exact antithesis of where you should not go? Again, ladies and gentlemen, the more you try to mobilize, first and foremost, the more you try to burst your bubble, the more you try to fight tribalism, the more you try to mobilize, and the more you try to understand the world seen through the eyes of others, that's where the boulevards open up. That's where there's more light at the end of the tunnel. And this is where you can start looking for your keys in other places beyond just, you know, where there was light. So I think America provides us with a cautionary tale, and I hope a little bit of hope for all of us that there might actually be light at the end of the tunnel.
Thank you very much, Jeremy.
Thank you, Nicolas.
Thank you to all of you. I'm giving back the speech token to the real boss of this whole organization. Her name is Laetitia. I hope I'm giving you a rendezvous next week on the 8th of October.
Thank you, Nicolas. Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you to all of you for all your amazing questions. And to answer your questions, yes, this webinar has been recorded, and you will get the link in a couple of days together with the reading list of books suggested by Jeremy. So we thank you very much for taking part in this conference. We hope that you can join us for the other webinars that we have planned. Next one is next week, October the 8th at 5 o'clock Central Europe time, 5 o'clock, with Professor Hélène Musica, who will talk to us about resilience in business. So a big thank you to all of you, and see you very soon in our next webinar. Bye-bye. Thank you.